with the book called You Cannot Sleep Through Your what? Awakening. Your awakening. How many people are awake? A show of hands. Almost all of you. That's pretty good. Well, of course, what we know about sleep is that it usually runs in cycles. And it seems like the spiritual growth has this dimension of waking up and falling asleep, going back to sleep. Or we could also say, I got to remember to stay by the microphone. Okay, I'll do that. Remembering and forgetting. Yeah? That's the game we all play. We remember the truth. We remember the truth, and we're back into knowing who we are, and we feel our wholeness and our self-worth, and we're loving life, and we're seeing the good and the great in people, and then the curtain comes down, and something triggers us, and then it's back to feeling separate, separate from our good, separate from life, separate from abundance, separate from peace and joy and all those goodies that we had when we had our hearts open, our eyes open to the truth. So we say that because it's really important when the mind is listening to lessons that, and I'll specifically say the egoic mind, which is the dualistic mind, the one that quickly jumps between the polarities of good and bad, that if we're not doing it particularly well at a particular time, then we can jump into judgment of ourselves. Has anyone ever heard of that? Yeah. And so there's a part of us that thinks we need to be harder on ourselves in order to become softer. And it's paradoxical, but the more that we sort of get down on ourselves, the farther we push out this recognition, the further we come from waking up to who and what we truly are. So it's very important that we have compassion for ourselves. And even though many of us have compassion for others, it's very easy for us to extend compassion and give allowances for people, except for certain people in life, those few exceptions that somehow we can't muster it. But for the most part, we can be compassionate. But somehow when it comes to ourselves, it feels like we get very stingy in the compassion department. And so it's just as a reminder, and it's just not for you, but it's for who else? Me, for everyone. Because what we're not wanting to do is, we're not wanting to raise up these spiritual ideals in order to feel that we're so far from them. We want to raise up these spiritual ideals so that we can recognize that even though they seem high and distant from us, they're actually very close. They're closer than breath, as Jesus said. And in the Quran it says, closer than your neck vein. I mean, this is who we really are. And who we really are has no desire to bash or berate who we are not. And so if we are really seeking this realization of who and what we are, it's important that we adopt the compassionate strategy of one who never really sees us as separate from who we are. That we have only fallen asleep, that we have only lost this awareness by dreaming we are separate from life, from God, from all that is good. It's a trick of the ego. It's a sleight of hand of consciousness. And that doesn't deserve any kind of berating or judgment. It is only prescription for it is what? Say it out loud. Waking the freak up. I had to get your attention, I'm sorry. I felt you'd fallen asleep on me, and I just can't have that during this talk. Any other talk would be fine, but waking up. So I have some notes here somewhere. Let's see if I can get to those. Oh, waking up is hard to do, right? So it's a chapter in the book. I did not make that up. You could have easily seen me making that up, but I did not. There was a song, you know this song. My grandparents told me about it. Maybe it was my parents, by Neil Sedaka, called Oh, they told you too. And it has this very intellectual, very articulate, deep and profound beginning to it. I'm going to read it. It's almost, I'm going to make sure I get the language correct in the pronunciation. Do, down, doobie, do, down, down. Are you with me so far? Comma, down, doobie, do, down, down, comma, down, doobie, do, down, down. I think there's a hidden message in there somewhere for us. And then it goes on to say, breaking up is hard to do. But I guess if you could say all of that, you can understand that somebody might have a hard time communicating with you, and breaking up might be the obvious outcome there. But so breaking up is hard to do. Waking up is hard to do. And so why is waking up so hard to do? It seems somewhat paradoxical or inconsistent with the truth that if we already are this, we are these spiritual beings that are made in the image and likeness of God, or by any definition, we are spiritual beings first and foremost, primordially, we are nothing other than that we are just sort of taken on this form, but that's not who we are. If that's the truth, then why wouldn't that be the easiest thing to wake up to? Yeah? I mean, wouldn't it? It's like when you wake up in the morning, you don't, like if your name is Mary, you don't wake up in the morning going, am I Sue or Barbara? Or you know who you are. At least you know the name that's been given to you. You know the identity that you have taken on, the one that sort of started somewhere early in your life, and you were seen as a Mary, and you were told this was your name, and you got to know yourself according to how you were conditioned, and how people saw you, and how you were valued, and what worked for you and what didn't, and you made up stories about yourself in terms of how people treated you, and you developed this self-image. And by golly, it's hard to let go of that, isn't it? And I think that's primarily what you and I are up against. It isn't that we have to really do anything, but we do have to let go. We have to have a looser attachment to this mind-made self, this identity that we have taken on that is external, that is secondary to our being, that's sort of a cloak, like the Star Trek used to talk about a cloaking device. I mean, basically you're an invisible being, but you take on this cloaking device so you can be seen and recognized in the physical world. And to do that is a trip, and what today's talk about is a trip from the head to the heart. The mind is a wonderful instrument, and it's so useful in this human journey, and we don't want to denigrate the mind, but we also want to know that it has its limitations when it comes to the spiritual awakening process. There's a wonderful metaphor in the book of John where John the Baptist, sort of comes on the scene, and he's recognized for all of his abilities, and John is very intellectual. And he really understands the truth, I mean, he captures the nuances of the truth, and he's a deeply spiritual man. But it seems to be at a perceptual basis, and he talks about the one that's going to come after him, which of course is Jesus, and he says. He says about Jesus, he says, he must increase and I must decrease. Do you see? So he that he's talking about must increase is this sense of who we are, which is not of the mind. That way of knowing ourselves, which oftentimes is felt to be here, domiciled or residing in our heart space, that is the underdeveloped awareness that you and I have. And so when we're in our head all of the time, and most of us are, we've got this discursive thought that's just running nonstop. And it's lovely when it's helping us get from here to someplace on the map that we're trying to go, or we're trying to solve, math problems or things that require the intellect. But when it's not being required to sort of calculate or rationally figure something out, it would be important for us, if we're really sincere about this journey, to pull back that tendency to live up here in the awareness of the mind. And to pull it back just like you would rein it in. You would rein in that sort of awareness and let it just rest in the heart space. And when you rest in the heart space, you then become familiar with the sense of being. Not the sense of doing or the sense of who you're not, but the sense of who you are. So all of what you and I have learned over however many years we've been studying to awaken, most of the practices designed to move us out of the head, out of the thought, out of the conceptual idea of spirituality into the spiritual understanding. Does this make any sense to you? 4 people, that's great. So I'm going to go ahead anyway because it's important. So how are we doing on time? Okay, we're good. One of the things that also sort of stands in the way, and I'm going to get to the good news, by the way. It's not just going to be a downer, I promise you. But we've talked about this before, but it's really important because it indicates a countermeasure that you and I need to put into play. And that is that we have a negativity bias. Have you heard that before? Not just not just the in-law that you're thinking of right now. But we all have a negativity bias, and this has been proven scientifically, and we come by it honestly because we started in a very scary world, yeah? And I mean, this isn't particularly scary. I don't think too many people are worried about a saber-toothed tiger coming in the open door here. That's why we have the door open. But we may have a modern day version of what a saber-toothed tiger might be. And since we learned very well that for us to survive, that we're going to have to be very concerned about things that can hurt us and only give casual attention to things that are positive, we've developed a negativity bias. So Rick Hansen, who wrote the book Buddha Brain, he called it, we are Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. So we hold on very tightly to those things that are negative, and positive stuff just sort of slides off of us. Well, that's just the way we are wired humanly. So knowing that, it prescribes not just, oh my God, what hope is there for us, but what would be the practices that would turn that around. And in the book that we were reading, or maybe reading, she talks about 4 processes or 4 perspectives that she has this lovely little what's the word for when you have initials that make up? Acronym, thank you. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, so thank you for helping with that. So she has this thing called FACE, which is, F-A-C-E. Forgiveness is number 1. Appreciation, compassion, and embodiment. So we're not hopeless. We have practices. And this is sort of the cool thing about this journey that we are on is even though we say over and over again so that we don't mistake this journey as being something that we are going to become, but only that we are going to awaken to, it would seem that nothing would need to be done. But if we have these biases and we have these limited beliefs and we have these conditioned minds that have put an identity and embedded it in our consciousness, then there is something that we probably need to do. Unless you're one of the 1 in a million people who just have the spontaneous awakening where all of the ego dissolves and they are just love and light from then on out. God love you, and please, I'll give you a Sunday to talk if you would like to. But for most people, it seems to be a journey. Yes? It seems to be a journey, but then of course time and space just a construct of the mind. That's why it only seems to be a journey. But nonetheless, what we want to do is we want to work with practical teachings that address an infinite reality. And that's really what unity has been about anyway. It's a very practical approach to spiritual awakening. We don't just rely on you having to take everything on faith. We let you know that there's things that are true and the illusions that we have and the beliefs that we have, and they can be changed. And as we change those beliefs, as we let go through denials, what's not true, we make space for what is true. And so we prescribe these things, and we don't just trust that, the great overlord in the universe is going to love us from a distance and that someday take us in if we're good. That we realize that there is a very immediate present possibility of us experiencing the kingdom of God, the love, the peace, the joy, here and now. But we may have to do something. We may have to clear away some of these misperceptions that we have and break through the veil of our false self so that the light of our being shines. Are you up for that? Yeah. That's what we're up to. That's all. So what I wanted to emphasize today in the final few moments here is that, and I referenced it, that we move from the head into the heart. There's something about the mind, the discursive thought that goes on in the mind all the time. It's really masterful of coming up with all kinds of reasons why this notion that we are spiritual beings is not true. It has no real understanding of our essential goodness. It always feels that there's something else. Do you know this one? Something missing, yeah? And again, this negativity bias that we have, we conditioned ourselves to this. But the heart, and I'm not talking about the beating heart, obviously. When I say this, it seems to be here. Most people sense their spiritual heart to be here. But the heart has this sense, this inherent sense of wholeness that does not need to be convinced against its orientation, that it is one with all of life. So for us to move our awareness into that space really shortens the journey and makes this a very efficient process of spiritual awakening, is when we can move from the head to the heart. And many of the practices that you have maybe are already successful in you doing that. And if they are, I'm not here to prescribe that you give up anything and do what we're going to share with you today. Meditation, prayer, mindfulness, visualization, all of these things can move us out of the head and into the heart. Just depends on what's working for you. So the premise here is that what we are seeking to know, we already know, but we will not necessarily know it unless we are in the consciousness in which it can be understood and seen. So we find value in moving ourselves into the heart space. And I wanted to share a clip. I've shared this with you before, but it really works well for today, so sorry. And it's the scene from A Beautiful Mind, the story of this very brilliant man who was troubled. He was brilliant, and he was in his mind, obviously, a lot of the time, figuring very complex things out. But what it kept from him the capacity to see what was real and what was true. And he had illusions and dreams and other characters. He was schizophrenic, essentially, and it tortured him. And so I wanted to show this, and this final scene is where his wife gives him another way of perceiving reality. Oh.
You want to know what's real? This. what's real. Maybe the part that knows the waking from the dream. Maybe it isn't here. Maybe it's here. I need to believe that something extraordinary is possible.
And I don't know if you could understand her words because she's whispering, but she says, maybe the part that knows the waking from the dream is not here, but here. We all want to believe that something extraordinary is possible, don't we? And what's extraordinary to the surface mind, to the human understanding, is just another moment in the kingdom of God, of the reality of our being. And the only way that you and I will ever realize this reprieve from the suffering, from the addiction to negativity, from the cup always never having enough, from the love that always seems to be still apart from us somehow, the peace that eludes our human understanding, is for us to get into the consciousness that already knows this truth. And we can do affirmations all day long. We can read all the scriptures, study all the world religions, and none of that will make one iota of difference unless we feel it in our being. Course in Miracles says it's a journey without distance from a home we never left. And the heart is the place where we already live and move and have our being with this essential oneness and love and life. So I want to give you one more practice if you can stay another 5 minutes. Okay, good. I was going to walk out there, but I can't do that. I'd have to carry this around. That would be silly. Okay, so this comes from the Institute of Heart Math. Many of you familiar with heart math? Yes, many of you are. And becoming heart-centered is, the reason for that is our heart is already connected to our sense of wholeness. It doesn't need convincing. There's no conditioning required. So to shift out of the head and into the heart, here's what we're going to do. I just invite you to close your eyes with me if it's comfortable. This is very simple, and you can do this really any time that you want to access this deeper sense of being and this deeper sense of knowing, and use this as the oracle from which you see and perceive, decide, are guided, make decisions. And so it's simply this. So we take an in-breath at the count of 5, and we exhale at the count of 5. And as we do this, we imagine that we are breathing not just into our lungs, but breathing into our heart. So the first time we just breathe in slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now do it 2 more times at that pace. Breathing into the heart, focusing on the heart. And now keeping that focus and that awareness on the heart, continuing the breath. Think of a situation or a time where you had great appreciation for somebody or something, a very positive experience. And everyone maybe has their favorite one. It might be a moment in nature. It might be being with an individual who you had great love for, a great love for you. A time when your heart opened and it was safe and lovely and beautiful. Bring that memory to mind. And just spend a few moments with that. The breathing, the focus on the heart, and the re-feeling of that experience, not just the thinking, but the re-feeling of that, how you felt. That keeps us in the heart. And gently come back to this room and open your eyes. And so this is a very simple practice of us. You know, we can't be in two places at the same time. We can't have our attention here in this heart space in appreciation and be in our head worrying or thinking or scheming or trying to figure out or kvetching or being negative. So it's very simply, we just allow ourselves to move into this heart space, and that is like a mute switch for the mind. Did you notice? If you were doing this exercise as it's prescribed, this shuts down. And so this is particularly helpful in situations where you're very conflicted, for example. You know, something that's challenging, you're not quite sure how to move forward. It feels like a conundrum that's insoluble. And moving in the heart space and getting there and then asking, what does my heart know? What does my heart know about this situation? And allow that to guide you forward. Because it dissolves that sense of separation. It doesn't have room for, you know, a personal good. It encompasses the greater good, because it is connected with all of life and all of love and peace and joy. So that's one way that we navigate this journey, one way to awaken, using the heart, using that which is already awake, instead of trying to figure out this life. Yeah? Has anyone had any luck figuring out how to live this life and control everything that's happening? I certainly haven't. So what we're learning to do is to allow life to be the way it is when we have no ability to control or change it, and we find peace there by being in this space that has welcomed life on its terms and doesn't need to change its mind about life. It's only the mind that needs to change. The heart is already accepted and can be present and is fully functional in the world, no matter what. So that's all for today. Next week we're going to talk more deeply on this subject, and when we talk about appreciation and gratitude, and we will continue the journey together. So, there we go.